hit.
Hey everybody. As many of you know, this is going to be my last video for 2017, and more importantly, the last video for this channel as a primarily gaming-focused channel. For those of you who aren't sure what I'm talking about with regard to that, I'll have a link in the description box down below to a video that explains why the changes to the channel are happening. But what I thought I would do with this last video is to take a few minutes and talk a little bit about my philosophy with regard to gaming as a hobby, as I think that's a pretty good way to both kind of put a bow on what the channel has been up until this point and transition into the sort of content that I'm going to be focusing on in the upcoming year. So I started playing video games about 40 years ago, in right around 1977. And that was, to a certain extent, the birth of the video game industry. You had things like the Atari 2600 and Pong, and the whole idea of video games as a commercial product and a viable form of entertainment for the average person. And for me personally, one of the most interesting things to think about when looking back throughout the history of this medium and my time with it is the idea that to a large extent, the games that I play today are the games that I envisioned playing when I was a kid. In terms of things like technical proficiency, graphical fidelity, audio engineering, narrative and gameplay elements, and all the sort of odds and ends and bits and pieces that make up a gameplay experience. And I think it's a really awesome and kind of amazing thing to have lived through that and have experienced that evolution firsthand. I think that experience in particular is a big part of the reason why I have run this channel the way that I have since its inception. Because in a lot of ways, I have a pretty profound and significant reverence for video games as an artistic medium. And I've always felt that it's very important to showcase and highlight the best of what gaming as a hobby and pastime and form of artistic expression has to offer. At this point, with about 300 videos on the channel, I can pretty confidently say that I have never really spent much, if any, time highlighting or showcasing or featuring a game that I didn't believe had at least some redeeming quality to it or some sort of special noteworthy attribute. And that's something that I'm actually pretty proud of, and it's something that I've been very careful to maintain throughout my time creating content here on YouTube. So for this particular video, I've decided to feature a little bit of gameplay from several different games that I'm particularly fond of, that I think are some of the best, most impactful, meaningful examples of what video games have to offer to those who choose to engage with them. But another thing that occurred to me as I was thinking through what I wanted to do with this video is the idea that there's a pretty big difference between where I am now as somebody who's been playing video games for 40 plus years versus somebody who is just starting out and maybe has little to no prior experience with gaming. And I think if you're looking for the more experienced perspective, if you're looking for the nuts and bolts technical arguments as to why a lot of the games that I've previously covered here are meaningful and important, you can very easily go back and actually watch all of those old videos. So to me, there's not much point in rehashing a lot of that stuff here, which has sort of encouraged me to lean more toward giving some potential advice to people interested in engaging with video games who don't have any prior experience with them. Now, I know some of you might have been expecting me to do a sort of year-end wrap-up video, as I have done in the past, but given the new direction that the channel's going to be taking in 2018, I really didn't feel like that was an appropriate way to wrap things up this year. However, it is worth pointing out that I did recently publish a couple of blog posts regarding my favorite Nintendo Switch and PC games of 2017 that you folks might find interesting. So I will link to those in the description box down below as well, for you more seasoned folks who are more interested in that sort of thing. Having said that, I did want to jump in and talk a little bit about some of my personal philosophy on gaming and give some suggestions for newcomers in terms of what to consider or where to start with the medium. One of the first big questions, and I get asked this question quite often by various people, is console or PC gaming. For me personally, the answer is both. But I think there are some obvious constraints in terms of budget and investment that, to me, if I'm thinking about this in terms of what somebody who has no prior experience with video games should do, I would honestly have to recommend console gaming as an initial pathway into the hobby. The main reason for that is that the initial cost is much lower. The experience is a bit more curated and a bit more streamlined and a bit more polished as a general rule than what you tend to get from PC gaming, which is a little bit more of a Wild West, open-ended, technically complex endeavor. And as much as I absolutely adore PC gaming, and I think will always hold it in my mind as the platform that represents the pinnacle of what gaming has to offer as a medium, I do have to concede, and I do feel pretty strongly about the idea that for a first timer, something like a Nintendo Switch or a PlayStation 4 or an Xbox One is probably a better choice for that initial experience. In terms of gaming genres, I think those of you who are familiar with the channel won't have too much trouble in guessing or predicting my personal favorites. For me, my top three would have to be a pretty close, heated toss-up between first-person shooters, strategy role-playing games, and racing and/or driving games. There are a lot of other sorts of games that I tend to enjoy and partake in at various times, such as fighting games and grand strategy games, puzzle games, and narrative-centric adventure games. And one thing I would definitely have to say is that in any given genre of gaming, there's at least a handful of games that I would rank amongst some of the favorites that I've ever played. So I think the big takeaway when thinking about genres or types of games, especially in terms of my advice to a newcomer, would be to not limit yourself and not be reluctant or hesitant to explore different types of games. I think one of the biggest, saddest misconceptions that a lot of people who aren't familiar with video games have is that all games are the same. That Call of Duty equals Portal equals Civilization equals Gran Turismo. Now, of course, to those of us who are familiar with the medium and the vast array of gameplay mechanics and artistic flourishes that are woven into various examples of it, will obviously find that hilarious and indicative of a lack of understanding and experience where video games are concerned. But at the same time, it's not entirely surprising or shocking to think that somebody who has no prior experience with video games might assume that the first sort of game that they see is the only sort of experience available to them. Fortunately, regardless of what platform you choose to engage with when experiencing games for the first time, be it a gaming console or a personal computer or what have you, there's pretty much going to be a vast array of options for you to choose from when selecting games to try. And with the relatively low financial investment required by things like used games, periodic sales, or free-to-play offerings, there's what I would consider to be ample opportunity out there to dabble and experiment with various types of games. So that's what I would absolutely encourage anyone to do. It's a perfectly natural thing to become somewhat enamored with the first game that you connect with as a player. There's something very pure and innocent and joyous about that experience. And some of my best memories with regard to gaming are certainly associated with the first time I played a first-person shooter, or a racing game, or a puzzle game, or any given type of genre. But at the same time, I know from experience that I would have missed out on even more amazing experiences had I gotten locked into a particular genre or a particular game and never explored beyond that. Now, of course, there's going to be some risk when trying new games. You might play something that you don't feel is as good as something that you've played previously, but that's just sort of par for the course at the end of the day. And it'll, of course, be up to you to determine how much exploration versus comforting you want to engage in where gaming is concerned. Finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about the social aspect of gaming, because this is another area that I think is often misunderstood or misconstrued by folks who do not participate in the hobby. I think there's a lot to be said for great single-player game experiences, and I've certainly played my fair share of them over the years and enjoyed them quite thoroughly. But I think one of the greatest, most meaningful aspects of gaming is the opportunity that it provides for social interaction with people of all sorts. One of the greatest things about video games, from my perspective, is the opportunity that they provide to interact with a vast array of people in both a competitive and a cooperative sense. Now, I'm not going to sit here and try to tell you that every online gaming experience that I've ever had has been amazing or fruitful or even positive from a social standpoint. And there's certainly a degree of work that's involved in cultivating and maintaining and enhancing social relationships through gaming. But I really do firmly believe that the rewards associated with doing that are very much worthwhile and certainly have been for me over the years. That's not to say that I don't sometimes enjoy a little bit of solitude and a game experience that focuses exclusively on me as an individual, but in a purely objective sense, I would have to say that my best, most memorable experiences with video games have been those that I've shared with other people. There's something about the interactive nature of playing a video game, knowing that someone else has seen the amazing things that you've seen and done, and being able to participate in that experience with them and discuss it after the fact, that provides something that I don't know can actually be experienced in any other artistic medium. For me, at the end of the day, that's one of the primary things that makes gaming a worthwhile endeavor and a worthwhile investment of my time. And in terms of advising folks who are unfamiliar with video games as to what they should focus on when first becoming involved with them, I think at least some effort needs to be made in terms of engaging in cooperative and competitive multiplayer experiences to truly experience the best of what gaming has to offer. Having said all that, I'm going to bring this video to a close. There's definitely a lot of other things I could talk about with regard to gaming and my general philosophy on it, but I kind of want to keep this video short and sweet and really just use it to bring this phase of the channel's existence to a close. Hopefully you folks have enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to hit that like button. If you'd like to see more videos from me in the future, which may or may not be gaming related, be sure to hit subscribe, and I will see you next time.
Hand cannons.
Prepare to be pierced.
Oh, what a letdown.
Better than a stim pack.